Hi, good evening, everyone, and welcome to this week's edition of The Real Question Time. At the moment, I'm waiting to be joined by a couple of people. I'm already joined by John Smith from the Common Law Courts and John Hamer, historian and author. I think we're still waiting on Delores to join us. I'm just waiting now. There you go. I can see everyone now, even better. What a luxury. Hi, good evening, everyone. And welcome to okay, so The Real Question. Should you bear with me 1 second? We just a couple of technical problems, and we should be. Sorry, I've just paused it now. I think, although I can't see everyone again. But okay, yeah. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this week's edition of the Real Question Time. I'm joined this evening by John Smith and John Hamer. Hopefully we'll be joined by Delores, Cahill and some other guests as we progress. Good evening, Johns. How are you both?
Hi, mate.
Hello.
All good. Yeah.
Good. Another week in another week of politics. Another week of vaccine news.
Another week in paradise. Yeah.
Yeah. Another week in lockdown. Another week in paradise. Yeah. Last week we touched base on a few subjects. The news from the week, as it were, and also something we've been trying to do every week, which is bring people up to speed with some of the history behind what's going on, and a weekly update on an introduction to common law, which John Smith of Common Law Courts is with us every week, coming to us live from Scotland. How's things in Scotland this week, John?
Dull, grey. Never changes. No, it's okay. It's fine. It has been dry up here, but over on the west coast, they're getting clobbered in the rain seemingly. But it's not so bad over on the east coast.
We've had a bit of sun down here yesterday. I caught a bit of sun myself yesterday, but I'm led to believe we're expecting snow on Monday down here. I don't know about where you are, but
yeah, same here, I think. Yeah.
But yeah, so if you don't mind, I was going to introduce John Hamer. In general, over the last few weeks, we've been blessed by having so many guests, which I'd like to thank those who participated. But one of the downsides of that is that we don't get to hear as much as we'd like to from some of our guests. And I thought we'd give John Hamer a chance tonight to just take us through his field of speciality, and perhaps give some information and an education, hopefully, to all of us about the history of some of these things on going back through the years of how we've got to where we are today. John, take us through your take on the prior history to where we are and things from your point of view.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's perhaps worthwhile just giving a little bit of my own background first of all. Is that probably the best thing to do? And then
far away, mate.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've been in this kind of wide awake world, for want of a better word, for just over 20 years now, and for those 20 years, I've been researching and writing about what's going on today, obviously, but what has gone on in the past, and I guess I can link that eventually to what's happening today in the world, and why and how and who's behind it all, because I think it's important to understand the background. I mean, I know a lot of people have kind of woken up because of the COVID situation, or kind of woken up, but I'm not sure whether they see, most people don't actually see the big picture, the bigger picture of, the background to it all, and why it's happening, and who's controlling it. So yeah, you're right. It's probably worth delving into that a little bit and actually covering some of those aspects which will kind of put it into perspective, because I speak to a lot of people, and the question they always ask me is, well, why? We understand it's a scam, we understand that what's going on and that they're trying to control us and blah blah blah, but why are they doing it? Who's behind it? What's it all about? And it's kind of a big mystery to people. So yeah, it's absolutely important that we understand that perspective. I mean, this has been going on for not just centuries, but millennia. Ever since the advent of man. I mean, I don't want to go into what I believe is the history of mankind, but it certainly isn't what we're led to believe. You know, we didn't come here as a result of pond slime emanating from the primordial soup, as they tell us. I mean, that is just absolute nonsense. I mean, I don't have an actual answer to where we came from as a species, but it certainly wasn't that. But the point is, getting off the point slightly, of course, but the point is that these bloodlines which control us, and you know, people think politicians are in charge. Well, they're absolutely not. Politicians are just glove puppets of the people who really run the world. And the people who really run the world are a group of bloodlines. Some people say 12 families, some people say 13. There's different takes on it, but that's kind of irrelevant in a way. It doesn't matter how many they are, but it's important to realize who they are, most of them, and what they represent and where they came from. Well, they go back to the dawn of humanity, actually, and the people who are running the world actually are the same bloodlines as the people who ran the world going back to Babylonian and Sumerian times, through all the major empires, through the Roman Empire, the Greek Empire, the Byzantine Empire. It's the same group of families, and all these people today that hide behind the scenes are all the descendants of those original rulers of the world. It never changes. For example, a lot of people don't realize that something like all but about 3 US presidents are directly related to the royal family of the UK. So, you know, it's a surprise to a lot of people, but it's very easy to prove genealogically. I mean, I used to be a genealogical researcher anyway, so I found out a lot of this stuff for myself, but it's easy to find. I mean, anybody doing a search for this kind of stuff, you'll see that is definitely the case.
That's including Barack Obama, isn't it, John?
It's even including Barack Obama, believe it or not.
That may surprise many of our viewers.
Yeah, because obviously he's got white ancestry as well as black ancestry, and obviously it's through the white side of his family. Yeah. So I mean, there's been I don't want to sound too conspiratorial, but let's face it, it is a grand conspiracy. So let's not let's not mince words. Let's call it what it is. It is a conspiracy. And it's been a long-term plan by the international elite, whatever word you want to apply to them. Some people call them the Illuminati, to enslave humanity in order to bring about what they refer to as the New World Order. And this is exactly where we're headed. Yeah. Sorry, Justin.
No, I'm like everybody else. I'm sure we're all listening. John,
okay. Yeah.
When you refer to the 12 or 13 families,
yes,
the bloodlines from the world, how relevant is that to today? Are we still talking about these same billionaires?
Absolutely.
This is an extension of that.
Yeah, definitely. I'll read you out a few of the bloodlines, and all these names should be familiar to people. Okay, so it's hard to put them in order of seniority, but certainly the top 3 are the Rothschilds. Everybody knows the Rothschilds, the Rockefellers, the European royal families. I would say they are the 3 major ones. But in addition to that, there are people like the Astors. The Astor family are into money, drugs, real estate, politics, you name it. The Russell family, again, money, drugs, and the Russell family were the founders of the Skull and Bones, which is the American secret society attached to Yale University, to whom the Bushes, etc., belong. The Lee family, that's spelled L-I, not L-E-E, and that's kind of the Chinese branch of them, and they control the entirety of the Far East, including China, Japan, and all the major countries there. The Bundy family, the Onassis family. I mean, I could go on in great length about Aristotle Onassis and Christina Onassis and the Onassis family. I'm not going to do that.
He was a shipping magnate, John, wasn't he?
He was, but he was much more than that. He was very influential. It was one of the kingmakers in regards to the US presidents while he was alive. He was very instrumental in getting JFK to the US presidency. He had very strong links to Joe Kennedy, JFK's father, for example. And he was the prime mover in making sure that JFK was selected, and I use that word advisedly, selected and not elected, as they all are. They are all selected by these insidious bloodlines. You've also got the DuPont family. Everyone's heard of DuPont, big, chemical company, heavily involved in politics and money, as they all are. And the Kennedy family themselves, they're big players too. The Reynolds family are into tobacco and metals and politics. And the Krupp family, who are it's a German branch of it, and they're into the military side of it, the steel manufacture and the weapons manufacturing, as well as chemicals, and again, politics.
Would they be the people behind, is it Faber or Fayer, the German pharmaceutical company?
Bayer. Yeah, I'm not sure what the connection is there, mate, to be honest. But obviously Bayer is the big German pharmaceutical.
Bayer.
Yeah. Bayer was the pharmaceutical company that originally took out the patent on aspirin way back.
There's some evidence that they were behind financially backing Adolf Hitler. In terms of the big pharma once again, and history repeating itself. Is that right? Or?
Exactly. I mean, it's all linked. Bayer were involved in financing Hitler, but then again, so were a lot of other companies. Especially American companies like Ford, the Ford Motor Company. Henry Ford was a big believer in Hitler, and he backed them very strongly. The UBC Banking Corporation of America, that's the Bush family. They backed Hitler. In fact, George W. Bush, the idiot's son, his grandfather, Prescott, was the head of that corporation at the time. And after the war, he was actually indicted for trading with the enemy. So yeah, they're all involved up to the necks. They all play the game. They all, they're involved to a massive extent, far more than it's ever given credence for in the mainstream media. We don't hear a hundredth of what is actually going on in the top echelons at all. It's all very, very hush hush, and they do this through a network of secret societies. So the obvious one being the Freemasons. Anybody with any influence at all is Freemasonic.
What's your take on Freemasons, John?
What's my take? Well, that they are the prime movers in almost everything. Anyone you can care to mention with any influence at all in virtually any organization is a Freemason. And these people, it's actually a complete negation of democracy, because these people, they look after their own, and I don't just mean in a small way. I mean in a huge way. They will make secret signs to each other in court, for example. I'm sure John knows all about this.
Yeah.
And for example, and so they all have these signs that they can recognize each other with, and they just play this huge game of pulling our wool over our eyes.
It's a very pertinent saying at the moment, that now, John, isn't it?
Yeah, true. Yeah.
I thought about having T-shirts made with that, with people referring to sheep. I actually refer to people who are awake as freeple, as in free and people. But I did like the idea of T-shirts with that, the sheep with masks on, and they can't pull the wool over our eyes,
Yeah, very good. Yeah, and then you get organisations like the Trilateral Commission in the UK, the Council on Foreign Relations, which is its equivalent in the United States. The Bilderberg Group, the names that some people may have heard of, but perhaps they don't quite understand what the significance of these people are. There are a lot of factions, and some of them are conflicting. I'll concede that. But I think the big thing about these people, Justin, that we don't have as the opposition party, if you like, is that they have more or less an absolute cohesion to what they're doing, whereas we, as their opposition, are all split up into tiny factions. And that's partly done deliberately, but I think a lot of the truth movement is infiltrated and deliberately fractured and splintered, kind of send us in the wrong direction. So I do believe that if we could actually get our collective acts together, lose some of the egos that are flying around in the truth movement, and actually become a more coherent force, we would stand a lot better chance of making sure that everything, was.
I just said one of our viewers interjecting there and asking and basically putting out, and where does the Fabian Society come into the mix of things?
Well, yeah, the Fabian Society, it's essentially a left-wing group, but that is part of the overall, mix and match of kind of secret societies.
Yeah, Justin, I mentioned that because the logo they have is a shield, and on the shield is a wolf in sheep's clothing, literally.
Absolutely.
That is literally their logo.
Yeah.
When I first saw that, I was like, well, that is a bit in your face, isn't it?
Well, they love to do that, don't they? I mean, it's called Revelation of the Method, or
they have a punch on for that, John, don't they? You look at all the world leaders when they're doing the speeches over the course of years. I mean, we used to hear, we're entering a new world order.
Justin, that reminds me of a saying, hidden in plain sight. Because they're not hiding it, are they? They're not hiding anything.
No, I mean,
we had a video posted today. Now, I don't know how right that is, but they were showing what's led to be believed to be some kind of sort of satanic agenda type thing that they were filmed in CERN in Switzerland. Which is, I mean, if you be on a lot of the sites, if you go and see it, people that post stuff, and once again, things, it's almost like they don't care anymore. It's like, listen, you're dancing to our tune, and you'll keep dancing until the record stops, isn't it?
Yeah, well, one of the main reason that they do it is because they firmly believe, whether we like this or not, they firmly believe that by revealing the method, or the revelation of the method, as I mentioned before, by revealing that method, it kind of exonerates them karma-wise. Okay, so they've told us what they're going to do. So if we've not picked up on that, then well, I'm sorry, but we did tell you what we were doing, and that's a big element. They actually firmly believe that does exonerate them from any kind of bad karma or blame for what is going on.
So this has been going on for hundreds of years, and basically these people, at the top of the pecking order, getting their own way, and we're all dancing to their tune, John, yeah?
Absolutely. I mean, as incredible as it sounds, yes, it has been going on for millennia, and it is basically the same bloodlines going right through. And their end goal is to create this new world order, which is, again, it's easy to find out what it is they're trying to do. That included in that is Agenda 21, Agenda 2030. And this is kind of, I believe this is the beginning, or they believe that this is the beginning of their end game. This is what they've been striving for so long. And that they believe that they're almost there. But I mean, I think it will stop them. I absolutely believe that. And anybody who's worried or has any doubts about that, I would urge them to not.
So here we have the history of how this is coming about over the course of centuries. Mm-hmm. In terms of the elites getting their own way and laying down the path for which they intend to follow. Mm-hmm. I'd like to bring in John Smith at this course, because along the way where all this is concerned, how common law was introduced, and how basically our old laws, if you think, going back to Magna Carta, Bill of Rights and so forth, how the elite basically took away our legal rights, as it were, in terms of the law, and introduced common law in terms of what was from the law of the sea to taking away from the law of the land. And I'd like to invite John Smith from Common Law Courts to sort of take up the mantle there, John, if you can, taking us into that era of probably the East India Company and people like this, and how the trading laws were then sort of brought into our ancestors' way of life. Can you sort of take us from there, please, John?
Well, it was interesting to listen to John, first of all, and listen to the background. One or two of the things I hadn't heard about before. I wish someone had actually taught this to me at school when I went to school years ago. But unfortunately, he says we find that the people are unaware of what's going on, and it's not something you'll ever find out through education at school or anything like that. So
one of John's books is called The Falsification of History, and I think we'll get back to that, but it's within the title, isn't it, John?
Yeah. Well, basically, when I'd certainly been dealing with my case previously, I'd ended up in court through no fault of my own, just because I dealt with or I took on the establishment, the government. I ended up in court just to protect myself, but having lost all my money and paying for solicitors at the time, which I thought was a way to go, I ended up basically bankrupt because I took on the wrong people. And I then had to represent myself in court, which is obviously not the best thing to do. But I went there to take on a judge, and he effectively just looked at me, dismissed me, and told me that he wasn't interested in what I had to say. Literally, he said, "Well, I'm not interested." The fact I stated that I was a living man who stood under common law. There was a little debate after that. He just basically brushed me aside, and it was only afterwards when I turned around and he says, "Look, you can't do that." He says, "My understanding of the system here, there's no justice within the existing system. It just doesn't work." So from there, I spoke to many, many people and started to do a little bit of digging. And it was then I found out just how much of a shambles this whole thing is. Finding out that the courts, not let alone the courts, but everything is all based on corporations and contract law. The courts, the existing courts, which are there for justice, are registered corporations. This is the politicians, the House of Commons, House of Parliament, everything. They're registered corporations, even the police. So when we actually look at that and we see that they have their own agenda, they're not there for the people, which unfortunately people don't realise that.
It's a little known fact that you were educating me on this the other week, John. So I'm obviously not teaching you psychics, but it's a little known fact that I didn't realise that all courts are businesses.
Oh yeah,
it's
actually quite good, because what we've done is we went initially when I went to a court, I had to deal with a judge, and the judge wasn't wasn't allowing us to proceed or allowing me to defend myself. So I challenged the decision, and when I went in, I was aware that they were a corporation, a registered company. It was actually sneaky, because the courts in Scotland are actually listed as corporations, but they're not listed in the UK. They're actually registered in New York. So effectively, if you do a company search in this country, it won't come up. But the Scottish Court Service is a registered company in New York. So not effectively do we not have a justice system. But the courts that we have are not even British. They're American companies.
So how far does that go back, John?
I couldn't tell you. It's been happening for decades anyway.
Straight away in my head, I'm sitting there thinking about patents, because when people copyright and patent things, they have to do it in America and for Europe and so forth.
It goes back. I couldn't tell you how far it went back, but through research we've found out is that basically says they all play the same game. It says, and a lot of the corporations are actually hidden away. Speak about hiding companies offshore, and that they do it over in America. So when you're doing a search in companies in the UK, you'll find that many of them won't come up. It says you'll find out that they are listed in America, one way or another, but they are all corporations. So what we did is I found out that the Scottish Court Service was a corporation. So what I did is I sent away and applied for a copy of the accounts of the company information. So I took a copy of it and went into court in Scotland. And in Scotland, we have sheriffs instead of judges. So I pointed out the judge that you had, or sheriff, that you had no authority or jurisdiction, and I was challenging that, and he couldn't proceed with the case. He says, "Well, yes, I do, and I am proceeding." At which point I says, "Well, no." He says, "Well, first of all, you're a registered company. You need consent and a valid contract." He says, "No, we're not. We're not a company." I said, "Yes, you are." And he says, "No, we're not." I said, "Well, that being the case, can you explain why you're a registered company?" He says, "I'm not a registered company, as in the courts." I said, "Well, yes, I have the paperwork here." He says, "Show me that," he says. So we submitted the paperwork confirming that we're a registered corporation.
Were they on oath when they said that, John?
Well, they should have been. They said, but they're not. They're not. He turned around and he basically looked at me. He said, "No, that's not valid." I says, "Yes, it is." He says, "It's a registered company." So what we've done is develop the concept since then. Each time we go to court, we do a company search. And we actually get the court documents for the registered company, the court. So every time you go into court, you supply the paperwork to confirm that they're a registered company. That straight away takes away the authority and the jurisdiction that they have. There's also a famous case in America, and because it's a Supreme Court ruling, it's valid in this country. It's actually called the Clear Field Doctrine, which is great because it was a ruling which confirmed by the Supreme Court that a registered corporation cannot prosecute and take a living man or living woman to court. So
Okay.
basically, as a living man or woman, we're superior to corporations. That's the way it works. It says, however, because the corporations do exist, they do not have the authority to deal with a living man or woman, and as such, they cannot instigate a case against them. And that was a clear ruling from the Supreme Court. Now, when you put that in, that confirms that you cannot be prosecuted by a corporation, which they don't like. They also, the other thing they do in the UK as well, is when you start tackling these so-called judges, they become very defensive. So much so that they'll use various things in terms, including contempt of court, and they actually end up throwing people in prison, or obviously putting them down and hold them in the police cells for 24 hours just to see if they'll change their mind. Now, the thing that they use, and they've used in many cases, is your mental stability. So they say that obviously if you dare say that you're a living man and that their rules don't apply to you, they question your mental stability. And they have actually sent people away for mental assessment, and they actually keep them locked up as well.
It's tried and tested. It's current. It's actually prevalent now and tried and tested in terms of other things. Because if you think, we see on the news, you see, perhaps incident of a terrorist incident, or someone's gone in the park, and rather than saying, "Oh, this was perhaps some form of extremism," how often do we then get that trotted out to us? Oh, yeah, it's a mental health thing. Although everything else that we know fits that bill of an extremist act, if you like.
We have many people helping with the common law court to develop. The common law court is the people. Basically, it's not an individual. It can be. It's not a registered company. It is only a lawful process that's available to everyone to protect them. Now, on the issue of mental stability, what we had someone, as a friend who does a lot of work with us, has been removed from his house. Now, it was 4 times it happened, and in the final time, the authorities, including the police, actually came in with force, and they toughed him out of his house. Now, this is still ongoing just now, and it's a really good case, but they've had to adjourn the hearing 4 times because they can't win this, so they keep kicking it down the line. Now, what had happened previously when he went into court, he stated he was a living man, and he stood under common law, and their rules didn't apply, and he questioned the authority and jurisdiction. Now, the judge didn't like that, and in each time we went to court, he was questioning it because he was becoming more irate, and we knew that it was just a matter of time he would question his mental standing or mental capacity. So I'd say to the guy, he says, look, when you go to court, you know what's going to happen next time. He says, yes, I know. He's going to question your mental standing or your ability. He says, yeah, I know. So we sat down and he said, look, here's how to deal with it. So this is the way it played out in court. It was actually quite clever. So he went into court and he was asked by the clerk to give his name or to confirm that he was Mr. So-and-so. So basically he turned around and he says, no, I am the living man, and he gave his name. He says, I'm not the legal fiction, but if you wish me to deal with it, I'm here to do so. So the judge then jumped in and says, look, I need you to confirm you are Mr. So-and-so. At which point, again, through the conversation we had, he argued this for 3 or 4 minutes. He says, no, I'm a living man. I'm questioning your authority and jurisdiction. So the judge wasn't happy and he went on, no, you will do X, Y, and Z. I need you to confirm. So this went on, and eventually after about 4 minutes, the judge says, look, I'm not dealing with this. I'm going to move on. And at that point, that's when it changed, because the individual turned around and stopped the judge in his tracks and said, look, I'm sorry. Before you proceed, I have to express to the court that I'm concerned. And the judge looked at him in astonishment and says, what do you mean you're concerned? So he paused slightly and looked at the judge and says, well, we're actually concerned about you. In which case the judge looked at him and says, what's going on? He says, well, I've actually been speaking to you for 5 minutes. He says, we've had a conversation and I've stated I'm a living man. If you don't have the mental capacity to establish that I'm a living man, having spoken to me, I don't believe that you're fit to sit on the bench. And until such time as your mental capacity is assessed, I wish you to recuse yourself from court immediately. And the judge says, don't be silly. don't be so, I'm not doing that. And he says, look, you can't do that. He says, you've already turned around and said that you're happy, you don't recognize me as a living man, but you've also stated that if I pretend to be a dead entity, you're happy to speak to the dead. If I told you that I spoke to the dead, I'd be locked up. He said, but you're openly in court stating that you're happy to converse with the dead. He says, so I'm concerned not only about your mental ability, but obviously the safety of the public. So I wish you recuse yourself. The judge Magna in the Hammer says, I'm not dealing with this. It's adjourned for 2 months. He got up and run out of court. And that was it.
I found it an interesting thing today, actually, a conversation. Someone was saying to me about doing something in a common law name. And the basic principle of not using your surname, and if you wanted to use other names within your name. And it suddenly crossed my mind, because I've got 2 middle names, and it suddenly crossed my mind, oh yeah, that would actually makes up a name, within that. That sounds right, first, second name, as most people would understand it. And it suddenly came to mind to me a story from a few years ago. And I was curious on your take on this, because I never thought about it this way round before. But Tony Blair, do you know what I'm going to say, John? The incident in the toilet. Yeah. Well, Tony, I don't know if you're aware of this. Allegedly, Tony Blair appeared in court, over a misdemeanor of him doing a sordid action in a public toilet. Yeah, you're aware of this, yeah?
Sure.
Appeared in court in his middle names of Charles Lyndon. So Tony Charles Lyndon Blair, yeah? Which once again sounds like a proper name, doesn't it? Charles Lyndon, If your name was Charles Steve, maybe it wouldn't. But and it crossed my mind that, there's very little published about this and how much has been covered up about it. But it's there, ladies and gentlemen, if you Google it. Our Prime Minister, prior to becoming Prime Minister, was arrested and in court and so forth. And charged and appeared in court, charged with, I think it's a lewd act, I think it actually was, but I might be misquoted on that, in a public toilet, allegedly maybe not on his own. And if you think that he then went on to be Prime Minister, people think, well, how do we not know that? So the basic principle is that I think Tony Blair may well have been advised, John, and this is where I'm coming from, by a common law lawyer, or certainly falling back on common law, to appear in court in his middle names. So in court, so there's court documents that Charles Lyndon, which is Tony Blair's middle names, appeared in court over this matter. It then sort of raised the thing to me with common law that if prime ministers in this country have chosen to hide behind it, or certainly to invoke common law in a case involving a prime minister in this country, surely there's the thing the other way around then. If you want to then say, for example, Matt Hancock, as people may or may not know what's going on, Matt Hancock recently, a judge in London ruled that Matt Hancock had acted unlawfully. Yeah. So, here lies my question to you of something that we've spoken about before, John, about the possibility of subpoenaing Matt Hancock to a common law court based on the fact that a judge has already said that you've acted unlawfully. What's your take on that?
Well, we've actually, to get back to the points you covered earlier, I said, but obviously a quick one with Matt Hancock. The judge recently in London had dealt with that issue. They're actually, this is about a year or so behind the common law court, because the common law court prosecuted Matt Hancock just over a year ago, but 18 months ago. It was for obviously vaccinations as well. He was actually brought to a trial in Manchester. He was summoned to appear and he was prosecuted and found guilty by a jury of his peers under common law. Now, the papers were served them. They are up on the website just now. Obviously, we need to deal with enforcement to get that up and running, but he will be held accountable for his crimes against the people. Now, these people, this is when you're speaking about that, if we go back to some of the issues you raised earlier, what we've done is the state have actually to protect their position, and in relation to what they're looking at a new world order, they've put together a system just now, and they're obviously trying to educate the people as to how to use it, i.e. dumb the people down so they don't know, and they don't know what's happening. So you have the court system supposed to be there for justice. It's not. We've established that they're run by corporations. They're run for profit and they have nothing to do with law. He said, now this has happened. So when you deal with the judges within these courts, they're actually acting in a capacity for profit. They're acting as a corporation. Now, the whole system's like that way, including the courts. And it's the same when you come to politicians as well. They're all playing the game. They know how to protect themselves within the system, but it doesn't matter if they actually are not good at it, because the system is there to protect them anyway. He says, you'll never find anyone, any key players, being prosecuted within the system unless it meets their needs. They have an agenda and they'll just play accordingly. So the courts are there to ensure they get the results they want. If you obviously are caught, if you suffer harm, loss, or injury, the last thing you do is go to their courts because they're not there for justice. They have nothing to do with the justice. It's only when you take the court situation and you take the authority and hand it back to the people have the authority. They can convene these courts. And when you discussed earlier on, going back to the likes of Magna Carta and things like that, these documents are all good. They're all founding documents. And there's others throughout the world as well. He said that they are used for protecting the people. However, the thing to mention is these documents were created by the establishment. Magna Carta only came about because the barons needed to protect their income from King John. So the barons decided they needed to hang on to their lands, their titles, and their money. King John was taking it, so they needed to do something. They couldn't do it on their own, so they decided they needed the people. So they constructed the Magna Carta to benefit not only them, but the people, and the people have benefit from it, and it's a great document, which is still valid now. But they used that to pitch it into King John, and King John had obviously signed it off there. So that gave us a founding document. But since then, they've abused the system because they tried to change everything and drag it into their system. There was an amendment to Magna Carta later on. They changed some of the terms in it. And the later edition of Magna Carta, it was set up. It wasn't obviously a founding document. It was basically a statutory instrument. And what they've done is they've continued to change that over centuries. So much so now that if you speak to a judge within court, they will tell you that Magna Carta no longer exists as a valid document because it's been replaced by statute law. It can never be replaced by statute law. He said the original document from 1215 still stands. It cannot.
So does the Bill of Rights still run into that, or from that, as it were?
Well, yes, it does as well. The Bill of Rights is created obviously by the establishment. Anything, when you're looking at common law, and this is a misconception, when you look at common law, and if you ask the courts and you state that you require a common law hearing, they will say to you that they have common law courts. Well, no, they don't. If you ask them what a common law court is, they will say it's a court been established over centuries, and it's been established using previous court precedents, decisions over the centuries. But the thing is, that's not common law. That is laws and a setup and a system that's been created, and it's been given the name common law, but it's not, because it's been set up and structured based on establishment decisions by the existing courts, the judges, and the crown. Under that auspice, there's no way anywhere in there that the people were involved. The common law and the law of the land is down to the people. The people never set these case precedents. It wasn't their courts. It was the establishment courts. It was their decision. It was their judges. When you come back to common law and you convene that duty with men and women from the land, it says you also take your court officers from the people as well, and you establish the whole procedure in a court venue. Then it becomes the law of the land and common law, natural land, universal law, or God's law, whatever you want to call it. It says it's only when you take it there. As soon as you involve the state, you're involving corporation. It's no longer common law because you're introducing a corporation and the establishment.
Where did the royal family fit into that, going back through the years, in terms of common law? Because there is some, historical evidence here that I'm aware of, anyway. That it's almost like the Holy Grail or some fabled thing that people talk about. But there's a thing called the Queen's Chamber, We're currently we're doing a lot of work, as you know, John, into trying to uncover where the Queen's chamber is. It's almost like, you know, that Excalibur or something, you know, where it's buried, and which is supposed to be in the Royal Courts of Justice, but historically there's documents that tell you about the Queen's chamber, and the Queen's chamber, which is supposed to be the Royal Courts of Justice, was the common law court, like the highest common law court, that allowed the common man or woman to take a case free against anyone, so that you weren't impaired by wealth. You know, that if you were in the right, and although you were, you know, you may have been homeless or whatever, living on the streets, and somebody with money decided that they could take everything of yours or what have you, that you then could use courts like this. So it's almost like what we was referring to now as a people's court. You know, where did that sort of erode? Because it's almost like a secret garden, John, we were saying, you know, that they've allowed the plants to grow over, so no one knows it's there, but apparently it still is there, and it's still law.
Well, first of all, this is when we're discussing law. Law only becomes law if it's accepted by the people. If the people don't accept it, it's not law. You require consent of the people. So if the people don't accept it, it doesn't apply. Secondly, in relation to these courts, these so-called courts, I've actually tried myself to do that. And if we take this issue of obviously a lawful remedy, and you're there to protect the people, what we've actually done is I've tried to also serve a writ of habeas corpus. Now, having looked at this in relation to, depending on whether it's a king or the queen at the time, obviously these courts supposed to exist to allow you to represent yourself under common law. It's lip service. We've actually been there and tried everywhere to lodge papers. They will not accept them. They will not do it. You cannot get into these places. In relation to habeas corpus, which says we've done under common law, everyone has a right to lodge a writ of habeas corpus. Now, in relation to a case I dealt with, we had an individual who worked within the pharmaceutical industry, was being prosecuted and attacked by Big Pharma. And basically what had happened is they'd actually taken two individuals and locked them up. So when they'd actually lifted someone, I actually went to represent them and went to lodge a writ of habeas corpus. Now, first of all, if you do so, you can only do so in a high court. Secondly, because this was in England, it had to be lodged in a court in England, as the courts are different from Scotland. So we travelled down from Scotland to come down and lodge this writ. It had to be done in a high court. And because this individual, it was a weekend, it was a Saturday, we had to come down and lodge it somewhere. So I went to Manchester, believe it or not. That was the nearest high court we could get to. So we went down only to find out that the court was closed at the weekend. And there wasn't a 24-hour court. You couldn't get access to it. Now, seemingly, you have access to justice 24 hours a day. And these high court are supposed to be open, and there's security staff. You can get access to someone. Nobody would speak this. There was nobody there. So we ended up having to phone the High Court in London to speak to them about this writ. They wouldn't deal with us. Now, they'd asked why, and we said, you're unlawfully detaining someone. The writ of habeas corpus, when that's lodged or submitted, he says they are required to give you a hearing immediately. He said, because you're questioning whether someone has been detained unlawfully or not. And therefore, when the writ is served, you then are required to have this hearing to establish whether or not it was lawful or not. You're supposed to bring the body before the court. So the individual has to come before the court. But what they had said is this facility is not available. He says, to members of the public. Which I says, well, I am a member of the public. I'm a living man. You've unlawfully detained someone. There's a writ of habeas corpus. You are required to accept this. You cannot refuse it. There's no justice here. So they then went away, took advice, and come back and said, well, it's available, but it's only available Monday to Friday. And I said, well, how do you work that one out? He said, because they're detained now. They're being unlawfully detained. I've pointed out, and it's a Saturday. They says, well, because you're not a solicitor or a barrister, we will only accept it from the public on a Monday to Friday during opening hours. I said, so regardless of the fact you've unlawfully detained someone and I've lodged this writ, you're refusing to accept it because I don't work for the bar, which they said yes. So if you're not working for the bar and within their system, they won't allow you the rights that you have, your common law rights, your birthrights. So they don't give you that. He says you have to be part of the bar to be able to deal with this at the weekend. And eventually, when I went back on a Monday and argued the issue and went to London, they wouldn't give me a hearing. They made me wait 11 days. And then eventually, when I got into the hearing, I went to put forward the case, but they made me to wait till about 3 o'clock in the afternoon from going in the morning. And by the time I got in at 3 o'clock, I didn't realise the individual had already been shipped out of the country and sent over to a prison in France. So by the time I actually got into court, they were already away, and they deliberately held on to them, which means you have no rights in the system. It says your common law rights don't exist. They're ruling against you, and the system they have is a corporation, and it's used to establish what they want and to give the verdicts that they want to assist their plan. They're not there for justice. They're not there to assist the people.
I could hugely relate to that, John. Hugely relate to that, because I was extradited from a country in Europe, from Holland to Switzerland, and with exactly what you're saying, with you know, the things that the hypocrisy of what they do.
Yeah.
This is very applicable to Brexit, because I'm referring to Switzerland, which is probably the most nefarious country in the world, in my opinion, where everything nefarious is based, you know, and they don't do human rights and so forth. But what the precedent that I was sort of setting at the time was that Great England, UK wouldn't extradite someone to Switzerland because Switzerland doesn't adhere to human rights, mental health, things like that. I was actually in Holland at the time and was illegally detained in Holland, which is proven in the Dutch Court of Appeal, but they still extradited me to a country with no human rights and so forth, which people don't realise about Switzerland. It's the most powerful little country in the world, I suppose. And the same basis, if I was a Dutch citizen, Dutch government would never agree to extradite a Dutch citizen to a country with no human rights. The Dutch are far more liberal than we are in the UK. But so the precedent, or what's prevalent about it, is that what rights does an EU citizen have, John? Because as an EU citizen, clearly you've got whatsoever.
No.
You know,
it's basically,
people wonder why you vote Brexit.
John pointed out earlier on, which was very interesting. He said, look, everything's run here by established families, and they've run this system for cover the people. Now, the court systems as well. We don't have a justice system here. He says their system is set up. He says everything about it is wrong. He says run by established business, they're established companies. The police are registered as well. They're not actually there to enforce, obviously, or protect the people and ensure, obviously, there's no breach of the peace and they look after your common law rights. It's not there. They're there, and they've changed it because they're corporations, and the police, they are their officers now, not constables, to perform and to obtain money. This has nothing to do with the law, and the terminology about common law courts and your rights don't exist.
I'd like to digress a little bit, because slightly backing, if it's possible. For our viewers at home, John's written an author of just talking about whether it's
change, whatever you want to call them, as direct currency, if you like. So at that point in time, yes, they would still pay the bearer on demand. You could still go and redeem that note for whatever value of gold there was. But very quickly, they became used as the medium of exchange itself. And the gold was more or less forgotten about, because the goldsmiths realized that they never actually had to redeem any of those pieces of paper. So they were sitting on all this gold, earning vast fortunes with it, and not having to ever relinquish it. And eventually the banking system developed through central banks. Like originally it was the Bank of Amsterdam in the early 17th century, followed by the Bank of England in the late 17th century. And there's a very interesting story about how the Bank of England came about. But again, this is probably not the forum for that. I think we're just more or less looking at a brief overview here. So once the Bank of England was established in the UK as the central bank, they then began to adopt something that's called fractional reserve banking. Now, fractional reserve banking is very interesting because it enables them to lend money that doesn't even exist.
Yeah.
Over time, this has become our currency system. So all the money, if everyone decided to cash in all their notes or to withdraw the money that they have in the banks, there isn't actual money in existence to do that. You know, and they use this as a kind of a way of making vast fortunes, and they do. For example, if you go to a bank to borrow £100,000 for a mortgage, say, for example, they don't actually take a pile of money or a pile of notes and shift it from their account into yours. They just key into the computer system a few digits. So if you're borrowing £100,000, they just say, there you are, £100,000 in your account. Now, you know, that money doesn't actually exist.
In effect, they create money out of thin air, don't they?
Exactly. And you now owe that amount to them because you signed a fraudulent piece of paper that says that you do. And if you don't pay it back, along with the massive amounts of interest that they charge, then they take away, you know, all this, none of this money has any intrinsic value whatsoever, by the way. But if you don't pay it back over a period of time, they take away your house or whatever it is you bought with it, which obviously does exist and does have an intrinsic value. But they win whichever way round they do it.
So this is very applicable to now, John, isn't it? I mean, you know, myself and probably millions of other people, if they're not thinking about it, they should be thinking about it. How can a government afford to pay out all this furlough money and these loans and things, which far, far, far outweighs their income in terms of their taxation revenue?
Yeah.
Right. They're spending something, you can probably tell me better, or Mark Oakford if he's read some statistics, but far, far outweighing what's coming in. So once on this principle of what John's talking about, everyone should be taking notice of this, because this is why they can keep extending you money, because it doesn't exist. And I know that must sound really weird to the man on the Clapham omnibus, but you know, the Joe Bloggs in the street. This is a fact, and the same applies, I think, John. If you can probably tell us better than I can, where pension funds are concerned, and so you know, is your money really in there?
No, of course.
Pension fund.
I'm led to believe there is no money. Money doesn't exist as we believe it. The only reason that money exists is because we believe it exists. You know, I've heard people say, and it's absolutely quite true, you know, you could actually use monopoly money as currency if you decided that it had a value. And that's all they've done. They've decided that these empty pieces of paper have a value, when in actual fact, it probably, I can't remember what the exact figure is, but it probably costs them about 3 pence to print each note. And that note then becomes, you know, worth as they, you know, whatever denomination is printed.
Look at casinos, John. You walk into a casino, you give them a load of money, they give you a few bits of plastic, and you know, that's £500,000 or whatever if you're some millionaire betting, you know, like Mike Ashley or something like that.
Exactly. And going back to what you said about them printing all this, about the furlough money, they can carry on this on for years. All they do is print the damn stuff. There's nothing backing it. There's no gold standard anymore like they used to be. And
unfortunately, people don't see where this is going to, because getting more around to my field, especially in terms of the economic side of that and where this goes. Once again, people should take note. When Klaus Schwab is telling you by 2030 nobody will own anything, listen to what John's telling you here, because you're basically walking in. They're giving you for something that doesn't exist, like money. You know, there's an old saying: "There's no gold in Fort Knox," John. Yeah, that thing again. You know, if someone went there and say, "Pay the bearer of your money," as you're saying, there's nothing. They couldn't pay you, and so and once again, but as John's just said, you know, the flip side of that is that when they come to your house because you can't pay them, and all this furlough money they're giving you, go, well, we've been giving you all that money, you can't pay us, we're going to take your house. Listen to what Klaus Schwab is saying. Klaus Schwab is the founder of the World Economic Forum. It's been running for over 50 years, albeit in another name before that. And this is, you know, these aren't my words, these aren't John's words, these aren't any, you know, critic of his. This is his words, Klaus Schwab's words. By 2030, nobody will own anything. And this is where they're going with this. You know, people need to take note. John, in terms of gold now, this is another, we see these things now coming on cryptocurrencies. My personal thing is I sit there and wonder whether there's a Ponzi scheme waiting to happen.
But yeah, the thing is, Justin, that they control it. They control everything. They control the markets. They control the currencies. They control the currency exchange, foreign exchange markets, and they manipulate it up and down to suit their own ends. That's why boom and bust cycles exist, because they make money on the booms and they make money on the busts as well. They suck people in. Famously in America in the 1920s, the Wall Street crash, they actually spent virtually all of the 1920s enticing people, the ordinary people, to buy stocks on the basis that
a bit like they're doing with cryptocurrencies now.
Well, that's very true.
There are so many agents out there for it now.
Yeah. I mean, Bitcoin is a prime example of that. Obviously, that's the main one. That's gone through the ceiling, hasn't it? Goodness knows what it's worth now, $60,000 last time I heard.
Yeah.
At a flick of a switch, that could suddenly become worth $6. They could easily do that. They can just manipulate it to their own ends. They buy low and sell high. So they just manipulate the markets up and down. Every single kind of currency market you can imagine, every single kind of financial market you can imagine. And that's how they make the money. Well, one of the many ways that they make the money.
People, in terms of the so-called 1%, the elite, these people, as your Bill Gates is, there's a big thing going on at the moment, and this is what rich people have been doing for a long time. They're buying up all the land for more reasons than one. Famously at the moment, Gates is buying up every bit of land he can do. Because land has a value and that piece of paper doesn't.
Exactly.
This is where Schwab and Co are going with this. People go, what are you talking about? But everything they're doing at the moment makes you keeping things that would be classed as an asset and things of value, that you won't want to be able to keep them. The way things are going with cars, for example, every car that's been manufactured in the last 3 or 4 years, I think it is fitted with a tracking device.
Yeah.
The more skeptical people probably think, oh yeah, that's so they can follow us about. It's not. The reason I'm putting a tracking device on your car and they'll own up to it is so they can monitor how many miles your car is doing, through their GPM, things like that, for their maps, through using that tracking device, and then tax you on it.
Yeah.
They want to make cars. I mean, I was with a car dealer friend of mine today. He owns, I think he's got about 5,000 people working for him. So I think how many car places he owns. And the same thing, he fears for his industry, because people, en masse of the people, will not be able to afford to own cars soon. We're going to go back to the days when it was only the doctor in the community or something like that.
We won't be allowed to, Justin. That's the simple fact. We won't be allowed to own cars. We won't be allowed to own anything. I mean, I think Klaus Schwab actually said you won't even be able to own the clothes on your back. Yeah.
Now, this is the man saying this. For those of you at home who don't know who Klaus Schwab is, as I said, he founded the World Economic Forum. Yeah. And they meet every year. Good evening, Delores.
Hello, sorry guys.
I'm sorry I didn't know you were there because I can't see my screen, so I'm flying blind. I can't see who else is in the room. As far as I'm aware, there's just the two Johns. So now that I know you're there, I will gladly bring you in. But as Delores is just saying, the World Economic Forum, which is the institution that meets every year in Davos, and all the world leaders and eminent industrialists attend it every year, and the likes of Bill Gates have been speaking there for decades. Various people, Theresa May, all these eminent, so-called eminent politicians and that meet up and speak there. And this is how, when people say, oh, how can this lie be being perpetrated across the world? Well, I'll bring that back to Klaus Schwab. Yeah, how can it be, Klaus? These people that meet at Davos every year. But Delores, good evening.
Good evening, Justin.
How are you? You okay? You looking well?
Hello, John and John. It's amazing.
Hi, Delores.
We've been trying to take our listeners back, viewers back through history tonight, Delores, in terms of the original bloodlines, the
Magna Carta, I was listening to John.
Yeah, with common law and so forth. I mean, we actually got up to where we were coming back to about the law of the land and the law of the sea, John. If I could
and
just
can I
get you
just
to,
say before I was listening to John, and I've been
Yeah.
coming to this, for about, for over 10 years, right? Which is around the inalienable rights and freedoms and bodily integrity, which is, of course, the insult and assault that an injection is if it hasn't been safety tested and you don't get full informed consent. So when I realized maybe 22 years ago now that the injections, with children in America under the vaccine schedule, that they had in America a higher chance of dying if they were completely injected than children in the poorest countries in Africa, and was trying to communicate that really the parents were not given the full information, and that the injections were not safety tested and were not effective. And children don't really develop a full immune system until 3 years old. So the harm versus benefit analysis was that because they contained neurotoxins, asbestos-like substances, nanoparticles of aluminium and mercury, that there was no justification for it, and trying to hold people to account was around the rule of law and battery and assault and inalienable rights. So I've been studying, so I just want to say whatever John Smith was saying, I entirely agree with, right?
Yeah.
But I think what I would like to do is to give a vision of hope, right? That really we are the first people, probably just in the last 10 years, that have the ability to get information and discuss it with each other. So that even though my background is maybe biology and immunology, that I've been studying the law for 10 years. And that really, I think the globalists should have turned off YouTube, about 20 years ago, because the people that we are meeting now, right, have been basically plowing a lonely furrow for 20, 30, 40 years. And what's beautiful about the rule of law, what John is saying, is that we as people, men and women, have inalienable senses of justice. And what's been done is an assault for the last 20, 30, 40 years on the justice. So I actually don't say law anymore or legal. Really, it's about justice, and it's a philosophical, spiritual connection and underpinning of all of the ancient peoples of the world, that really we act in honor, do no harm, do unto others as you would like them to do to you, and that no one should harm you, right? And if they do harm you, and they know it's harmful, or they should know it's harmful, they need to be held to account. So just to give people a vision of hope, is that even if you live in a street, in a city, or you live in a village, or you live in a rural community, that really to, have a beautiful life, you just need to have a network of maybe 40, 50 families, and you need clean water, clean food. Everyone is happy to give a small percentage, like the Tobin tax, 1% of their transactions to underpin things like roads or the healthcare system. And then after that, you just can interact in your community in an honest and meaningful and accountable way. So I think what the globalists have done for 3 or 4 generations in every aspect of our society, where it is additions to water, trying to, for mental health, on average, they give 18 pharmaceutical interventions, which have very little effect, and trying to intimidate and bully and coerce people into not talking about issues, right, where some drugs cause much more harm than good. And then we have the, conglomerate of the politicians, the media, the police, and the court system not holding people to account and not giving people access to justice, right? So the thing is, when you see it, what the globalists want to do in a smoke and mirrors way is, just because they say something, there is a whole lot of insidious propaganda, and people have not been educated to how they can push back, right? But the beauty, there is a tragedy with COVID-19, obviously for the elderly, for business people, for society in general, for children. But almost the beauty of it is that all of the people in the world are realizing that what's going on is the opposite of the truth, and they do the opposite, like carbon dioxide and like it's good for plants. It doesn't contribute to global warming after 800 parts per million. We all evolved at 10, 20 times higher CO2. And the cheapest way to provide food for the world is to increase carbon dioxide, right? So that the whole agenda 21, all of the, you know, housing issues, car issues is based on carbon dioxide contributing to global warming. And yet the reality is when carbon dioxide was 20 times higher, we had snowball Earth, and that's there in the fossil record. And my background is genetics, right? So it's almost like the way they're saying masks, you know, is like doesn't cause a health issue when everybody knows you need oxygen to be healthy and have a good body and immune system. So I suppose what we need to say is the globalists have spent 3 generations to misinform people and to undermine the fabric of a well-functioning society. And in the World Freedom Alliance and in lots of the initiatives like John Smith is doing and everyone here, it's actually easy. You just need clean water, good food, and for societies to interact and engage with each other in their local community. And that if we have a nation, that you just need to spend like a 1% transaction tax, except for the family home, and that gives sufficient money to have a well-functioning society, but you don't have the superfluous, non-accountable money that can provide for this globalist layer of banking, United Nations, EU, unaccountable, you know, 20 layers. And, you know, this whole thing of having foreign wars of the private banking system and the civil servants being non-accountable and the politicians and police and courts not upholding the rule of law. So I think just to finish up, there is a vision of a wonderful world that's actually quite simple to do. And there are maybe 100 different groups and communities that already have shown around the world how this is possible. And in the World Freedom Alliance, what we're just going to do and are doing is road mapping, like John Smith's rule of law, common law, or communities where they actually live together and can, you know, engage with each other in an open and transparent way. And like Mads Pavik is doing in Denmark, you can have political parties that stand for election based on the Tobin tax so that the private banking system doesn't choke societies. So I think we have a tough year ahead, maybe 2 years ahead, but we actually are leading into a vision of a wonderful world from, you know, a year or 2 ahead for the next. It might take us another 10 years to build it, but then the next century will be a wonderful century of health and prosperity and truth.
I think touching on one of the words that you used there, Delores, is injustice. You know, when you talk about justice, injustice, I think it's a very powerful tool, you know, for people to feel downtrodden. And in history, it's something that has invoked passion in people and got people to rise up because of injustice, you know, and where at the moment our civil rights are being eroded and eradicated behind on the back of what's happening with everything else.
Yeah, so just to say, I'm not a wealthy person at all. I have, you know, but I did have a pension. My university didn't administer it, so I had to cash it in to pay a debt. And I used the leftover pension to buy a little castle that is 600 years old. And the reason why I did that is for health, heritage, and our future. But actually, when I saw it, I thought, this is going to be one of the courts, right, that will actually hold people to account. So the thing is, it's a beautiful, the rule of law and natural law, whatever you call it, common law, is so simplistic and so honorable and so good that basically it actually resonates with the human spirit and kindness and courtesy and accountability and justice, so that you live your life with honor. You don't harm anyone else. In fact, you try and engage in society to help. But if someone harms you, that with a jury of your peers of 12 convened, where the jury actually, you know, gives the judgment, that you can actually seek redress and remedy irrespective of how much money you have. And so that is a way of actually resonating with the human spirit. And if you combine that with democracy, if the governments of the nation are in bringing in acts that counteract the inalienable rights of freedom of travel, freedom of speech, bodily integrity, access to justice, the individual politicians can be held to account. It's a very simple, something that can be explained. And I would totally support that. I know is emerging in the United Kingdom, courts that will uphold the rule of law, our inalienable rights, and will hold police, the politicians, the courts, and the media to account if they're engaged in criminal and unlawful behavior. And I would myself even want to train as a police constable, and the same in Ireland. So I think the people that are on this call, we are inspiring and engaging people to say, if the police, the courts, the politicians, and the media are engaging in criminal and unlawful behavior, and if the media are initiating fear or contributing to fear that's entirely unnecessary, they can be held to account. Once you explain it to people, it's very simple. And if we have a police force and courts and people stand for election, we can actually turn this around in like 2 or 3 years, or maybe 10 years. But I think the world ahead of us will be much more positive and will actually resonate with the human spirit, and will be a wonderful place to live.
There's a few things, Delores, that are, posts and things that we see this week doing the rounds, that people have been talking about. I'd be interested in your take on some of these things. There's a post that's been doing the rounds all week amongst a lot of the sites, saying the relevance being about the vaccines not completing their proper testing procedures until at least 2023, with relevance to it only being allowed to be used in emergency status. So therefore, how could they, or how they're not obviously going to drop that emergency status, because if they do, then they're no longer, it's not legal for them to use the vaccine, because they're only allowed to use it in the state of emergency, and therefore that won't be till 2023, so it'll be illegal to use it. What's your take on that, Delores?
So I think that's entirely right. So it's a bit like, if the governments can only have huge power if in an emergency situation, they will create emergency situations in order to have huge power, right? That's very simple. So what's going on with the mRNA injections is that they have not gone through a phase 2 clinical trial, which is the animal studies, only on the basis that they are vaccinations, and that there is such an emergency that the regulators across the world, but in the UK and Ireland and in the EU, have said that they can skip the safety studies because of the emergency. Now, the clinical trials, some of them run, the mRNA injections run for another year or for another 2 years. But if there was no public health emergency, which if they made the treatments, preventions and treatments available, vitamin D, C, zinc, hydroxychloroquine, ivermectin, and another 20, then SARS-CoV-2 would be a prevented and treatable disease, which no one need die. Therefore, there's no public health emergency. But then they would have to stop the injections, give anyone who has the symptoms the prevention and treatment, and then do the animal studies and not give the mRNA until the animal studies were done. So the other thing is 0 mRNA injections were regulated anywhere in the world before September 2020 because of the huge harm and death in the animal studies and in any people that were injected. Okay, and then the example in one care home in Ireland with 51 people, there was 0 deaths of those 51 people in a care home in Ireland for the previous 5 weeks.
Yeah.
And then 26 people of the 51 died within 5 weeks. Now, this is a clinical trial. So all of the people injected in the UK, it's a clinical trial. And normally in a clinical trial, if one person dies, the whole trial is stopped in the whole world.
Yeah.
So
that's over 50%.
In one care home,
Crazy.
26 people died, right? And as we know in the CDC, after 5 days, when the first mRNA injection, there was a report on day 6, and 1 in 50, so over 2% of the people in America had severe adverse events, which interfered with their ability to function normally and to work within 5 days. And we see like 19 people out of those 51 died within 2 weeks. So really, the injection should be stopped.
But one of the other questions people are talking about, and to do with the PCR test, is about ethanol oxide, Delores. People not wanting to have the swabs put up their nose and mouth in terms of any side effects from the solution that it's washed in. Is there
Yeah, so there's huge issues. There's issues with that as well. But just maybe to finish off is that in a clinical trial, these are clinical trials, right, that are going on.
Yeah.
And that people need to have full informed consent, and that anyone with dementia. So I've been spending the last 6 weeks. Sadly, so many people died almost immediately with the administration of the injection. There's nothing really we can do. We've been looking at the death certs, but a number of them had dementia, which means that they should never be enrolled in a clinical trial because they can't give full informed consent. And that should be criminal. That is actually unlawful behavior. So what's going on with the mRNA and why I've been involved in Project Accountability is we need to stop this. The regulators, the doctors, the care home owners, the police, they should not be doing this. This is where the rule of law and what John Smith and everyone here is saying is that if people are engaged in doing something that kills people with dementia by enrolling them in a clinical trial when they could not give full informed consent, the individual people doing the injections need to be held to account. Okay, so what's going on is an undermining of medicine and science and is unlawful. So that's a process that I'm engaged in, as are many people around the world. But to say as well, a lot of the constituents of these injections are known to be toxic. And if they had the animal studies, they would, be so much adverse events that they wouldn't be approved for use in humans. And what's going on is an experimentation on humans, which should never happen. And then when you talk about the EO, the ethylene oxide, that is one of the most toxic ingredients. It's been used in these tests apparently, and that could actually be quite detrimental to everyone. But they are recommending now that these PCR tests are used in children, and so they can potentially have huge toxicity. But there's no need for the PCR tests if the prevention and treatment were made available, We don't need the tests, we don't need the quarantining, we never did. And I suppose that's why we need a new courts and police system. And I think Ireland and the British Isles are probably the leading countries in the world. And I totally support what's going on in the United Kingdom to submit papers to the politicians to hold them personally responsible for criminal and unlawful behavior.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, apologies. I can't see who's on with us, right? So I do apologise. So I don't know if Mick Stott is on here. If you are, Mick, say hello. Or Mark Oakford.
No, the two Johns and myself are here, and yourself.
That's the thing. I can't see a thing. I'm in the dark.
Look at participants. Just that if you press on your mobile phone, you'll see participants, and you'll get the screen of who's on.
Yeah. On mine, all I see is the individual that's talking at the moment. So I see me and you, and then if then somebody else comes on, it's the two individuals.
If you touch the screen, there's a participant thing. You just press
it's character building, Delores. It's character building. I'm just as people come along. Are you there? Is there anybody there? I feel like I'm doing a seance. But yeah, I mean, we've had some crazy things happening this week. In terms of posts that we've been seeing, and as you well know, we've been. With the UK Freedom Alliance, we've been working a lot behind the scenes, not just with following up from the great work that Mark Sexton, Mark Oakford, John Miller, and all these people are doing, Michelle doing it in terms of putting together that 1,815-page document that was then encouraging people to sign up to make a criminal complaint. And that's moving along at the moment. Thousands and thousands of people have made a criminal complaint, and I applaud them all for doing that. Behind the scenes, there are various other initiatives going on where people are looking at taking other legal cases and also defending them. A lot of the doctors, medical people, that come out and speak, like Delores and a lot of these other eminent doctors and nurses, everyone to do with all this.
Can I say my reflections on this after a year is that we actually have to go on the attack, right?
Yeah.
But really what I've been saying to doctors and whistleblowers and midwives and nurses is when they are put up to these regulatory bodies, instead of waiting, they should be injuncting and holding the individual chair and every member of that to personally and liable, because they are injuncting them to give injections that are causing huge harm and they are losing their livelihood. So the chair of these regulatory bodies, and the European Medicines Agency and, the medical councils in each of our countries, they need to personally actually rock up and be able to say that not giving an mRNA that results in a correlation of severe harm and death, that if they are wrong, they have to personally be accountable, and depriving people of their income based on doing a harm benefit analysis where they make a professional medical decision to not administer something, which is one of the most, is a clinical trial that results in severe adverse events and death, that really we need to be holding the regulators and the chair of these regulatory bodies by injuncting them for them to prove that what these doctors are doing is causing more harm. You know what I mean? That we need.
Yeah, it's individual culpability. I mean, it's the analogy is like the Second World War. Everyone's got a moral compass. Everyone's got a sense of right and wrong. And with German soldiers in the Second World War, it's like, what you're doing is wrong. You don't need somebody else. I'm just following orders. The Nuremberg codes, that didn't wash.
But the other thing is that's more fundamental, and where John Smith comes in and Michael O'Byrne-Sia is, in a way, if we are going to the police and the courts and the politicians that are actually not, there was always a weight of evidence that Boris Johnson and Dr. Leo Varadkar, Mayo Martin, there was more harm to do the lockdowns from a year, right? So what's more fundamental is that every, for 1 year, 68 million years of life have been lost in the United Kingdom, which rests on the shoulders of Boris Johnson as an individual, right? And every month that goes by, right, we're over whatever 6 million or 5.5 million years of life lost for the people alive now. So why we have to go more on the attack is, if the politicians, the courts and the police are not protecting the health and the life of society, that we actually need to call it out and say, what, any police that needs to be paid after, a certain number of months in the future, they have to actually reaffirm their oath when they're engaging with society. Otherwise, it's an act of either malfeasance or,
misconduct.
Yeah. And that's what I'm saying, is that really we cannot just keep submitting to their courts. We have to fundamentally look. And it's not an act of treason, because, what we're talking about is saying that, as we all saw in Trafalgar, and, we were all there, Justin,
Yeah. The one the other week on the 20th of March, Delores was huge.
Say that if the police are attacking peaceful people,
there was at least 100,000 people there. I was there myself, obviously. And as usual, the same thing that happens with the mainstream media. We all know what happens, but I think they were really caught out that weekend, because there's so much footage. When the BBC tried to say there was 400 people there, and people were showing videos and clips. I personally was at the front of that for quite a while, for several miles to London. I stopped as we actually led that down the Mall with various other people, and I stopped because I needed to use server number 1, and I stopped there, and I came out from using the toilet, and I stood there and spoke to John Miller and some other people I bumped into, and that crowd was still walking past me 50 minutes later, about 8 or 9 abreast. So if the average person walks at 15 miles an hour, we're looking at a 3-mile long crowd. And, and that was going for, on police figures, everyone was putting out over 100,000. So there's one, as everyone knows, I'm pretty sure everyone's aware, on the 24th of March in London, of April, sorry, 24th of April, I do apologise. And, for all those people that came along, if every one of you people brings a couple of friends with you, it will be the biggest protest, in London, I think, since the end of the Second World War, in terms of protest against our government.
But I think the thing is, Justin, as well, what everyone is doing here and we're doing in the World Freedom Alliance is that we need to fundamentally in our society say, and I would say categorically in Ireland, the police, the courts, the politicians and the media are not working in the benefit of society, right? Because if they did, they would say it's prevention and treatment. We don't need mass social distancing. We don't need a lockdown. So that we actually need to take a deep breath, and say, in the next year, we have to fundamentally build the structures and assess, and any police or courts or politicians have to be they don't deserve their salaries anymore. They need to actually, they're engaging in something that causes harm. And we need to just build those structures now and not be afraid to tackle it.
One of the initiatives we've been trying to do within, as you're probably aware, Delores, we speak quite often within the UK Freedom Alliance and obviously the World Freedom Alliance and everybody else, is with lawyers. And we've been encouraging lawyers. In America, this is quite a big thing, you know, where street lawyers give up their time within training and so forth, providing a few hours a week with what they call social conscience lawyers, really, I suppose. And we've been encouraging that, and we're trying to put together what we're currently doing at the moment is almost an in-house practice that people can then fall back on the different genres of lawyers. So whether it's medical law, employment law, contract law, and trying to gather around us barristers, solicitors, administrators.
Yeah, but what I'm saying, Justin, it's
up for
more
people to carry out things.
Yeah, but it's a little bit more fundamental. I think ordinary people need to stand for election, and we need to go through. And I know, like, I'm happy if the two Johns want to come in now, that we need to actually have a new police force, new prison service, and new courts, and that everybody, like, we don't allow chaos, because if you for 25 years have been studying the undermining, you know, the globalist agenda, they want chaos and disruption. So we have to, and I'm happy that I'm involved in doing it in Ireland. We actually need to engage in a process of a new police courts and people to stand for election in a movement situation, not in a political party, to over the next maybe 2 to 10 years to build up actually a whole new society where the police, the courts, the politicians, and the media are held to account. What do you think?
Could I jump in?
We've actually recently got the Police and Crime Commissioners elections coming up. I don't know about in Ireland, Delores, but in the UK, where members of the public can stand as police and crime commissioners. I know of 2 or 3 at the moment. Julie Hambleton is standing in West Midlands from Justice for the 21. Wish her all the luck with that. Hopefully she does overturn that, in terms of where you know, police forces have not been doing their job, you know, and individual members of the public are now standing up against them. John, how are you with that, mate?
Me, John. Oh, John.
John Hamer.
Right, yeah. No, I was just going to jump in there and say that I actually have, just this week, I've had first-hand experience and evidence that actually what's going on within the police force, there is a very large undercurrent of unrest about what is going on. And I think, you know, that a lot of ordinary police officers are now, although they're not able to do it overtly, they're certainly covertly, mentally switching sides. You know, I know someone in the police, you know, reasonably at a reasonable level within the police.
Yeah.
He's told me that he's seeing this more and more now. And I think this is part of the key to what Delores is talking about. I mean, I hope it doesn't come to having to necessarily scrap the whole thing. It may well be that we can turn the police. Now, if we were to turn the police, that would be a huge stepping stone, because the politicians and the judges and all the rest, they depend wholly on the police cooperation. If somehow we could get a situation where the police change sides, to put it simply, then, you know, it may not be that big a deal to actually enforce that change. And I appreciate that not all of them will do that, but I think if you get a huge weight of opinion on our side through that channel, then I think there is a good chance that in itself will stop it. Because what happened in the 1980s in Romania with Ceausescu, he was overthrown for 2 reasons. The first reason being that the police turned against him, and the second reason being that the military turned against him. And once that happened, he had nowhere to go. I realize this is a far bigger situation than that, but at least it shows that if you can get these bodies to switch sides, as it were, then I think it's very possible that we could, you know, it would be a much easier process.
It's an interesting thing that Mick Stott's doing with that. I think a lot of people have seen the footage of in Holland where the veterans were protesting with the people and stood in front of the people, in between the people and the police, and therefore there's sort of more of a mutual respect between the police and the veterans. There's something I know that they're trying to, we've been trying to encourage in this country for quite a while. I think plans are ahead with that for veterans that are out there to come and join in with people and the people and protest, and if anything, stand up and protect the people. I also think it's quite an indictment of what you just said, John, with the police, that we witnessed, especially at the end of last year at the protests in Trafalgar Square, was basically private police forces. If you looked carefully at a lot of the footage of the police officers, and I use that term loosely here, police officers, if you looked at their uniforms, they had G4S and possibly even Serco, and definitely G4S on their uniforms. So it wasn't a police officer. You're basically private hire, if you like, acting as a police officer. So if they're having to do that, is that an indictment on some of the officers that are now saying, do you know what, I'm not having this anymore? Because I certainly hope so.
Yeah, could be.
Yeah, I think.
I mean, I wasn't at the protest, but yeah, I mean, I had heard this, that it was mainly Group 4 and other security agencies that were there rather than the the police themselves. So yeah.
John Smith, is that a similar experience in Scotland? Do you think the tide is turning and people are starting to say, do you know what, we've had enough?
Yeah, to be fair, there is a big change, a shift in the feelings. We have had word back from police that we've been informed about are starting to change. They're not happy the way things are going. But again, many of these officers are actually working within the system. They have their pensions, they have their salaries is guaranteed. This is, and they're obviously families to support as well. Now, you have some of the longer serving ones, remember the old style of policing as well, and they're disgusted what's currently going on. But the thing is, there's nowhere for them to go just now. The systems built around them is to protect the establishment. They were speaking about the situation with G4 turning up at these protests. Well, the police are actually turning up at evictions for people from their family homes. Now, why that's relevant is the police are not allowed to attend these things, only if there's a breach of the peace. But the police are actually being contacted beforehand, and the mortgage companies are actually paying the police and the bailiffs to turn up and evict people. So the police are actually complicit in these crimes. And we've spoken to many police that have turned up and they've actually said that they don't want to do what they're doing. They're not there for that. They shouldn't be obviously throwing people out. They're aware that obviously says the people should have remained in their house. However, at the end of the day, these people have their own jobs and their families to think about, and they can't do anything else. Now, what we've done just now is we go back to the concept we spoke at the start of the programme, or John did. We spoke about obviously being splintered, and you have many people trying to do good work. And for whatever reason, there are many people who have ulterior motives. And again, there are people that work with egos as well, but we're not actually concentrating on the bigger picture. The bigger picture is protecting the people, which is what certainly the Commonwealth Court's about. It's restoring justice. And you've referred to, obviously, everyone's ability to determine right from wrong. And remembering a story which we used a long time ago. I remember seeing something on television. It just happened to be a little sketch. It was actually two children. I think it was a 2-year-old and a 3-year-old. They were siblings. It's a boy and a girl. They were actually playing. And what had happened is the 3-year-old had done something wrong, right? Now, with 2-year-old, the sister it was, knew what the 3-year-old had done was wrong. And she eventually just started wagging the finger and telling the 3-year-old off because he'd done something wrong. And this is coming from a 2-year-old. So basically, people are born with this within them. They have an inherent right. They can determine right from wrong. You see, they can establish that. And it's only when you actually deal with this, everyone can then be accountable for their behaviour. People can determine whether a wrong has been committed, or obviously someone suffers from harm, loss or injury. But it's only when you put this into the hands of the people and allow them to determine that it works. Unfortunately, while we have people like the existing courts, they're not courts, they're corporations. It's the same with police. You have them in there, but they're working for a state system and they don't have any choice. They're pre-programmed and they're basically told what to do. That includes the police. But because there seems to be a change in attitude and mood because of what's happening, they have to be given an option. Now, with the Commonwealth Court and part of the process that we have just now, they're looking at various aspects, and there are numerous people throughout the country, and we've spoken about this before to quite a few people, but there is obviously an enforcement about to be set up through the common law court. It says the enforcement will be obviously constables that will be used because the existing system is failing the people. Now, having put this in the hands of the people and having constables who will support and protect the people, it says all we'd say just now is if there are many police that are currently serving just now and they're unhappy, by all means, this isn't a job for them with the common law court as serving constables when they can go back to protecting people for harm, loss and injury, ensure there's no breach of the peace, and they won't have to worry about enforcing statutory legislation and fines. We go back to policing it the way it should be. Now, at the end of the day, in the real world, it'd be ideal if this wasn't required. But when we speak about the common law court, it only exists for one thing, to protect the public and to provide a lawful remedy. If the establishment, the courts, the so-called courts, the police and judges and all the various authorities and politicians behave the way they should behave, there's no need for the common law court. But the common law court acts as a moral conscience for the people. So basically, if they are suffering harm, loss and injury, the state is not dealing with it, well, the people can use this to protect themselves. And that's what it's about. It's providing a lawful remedy. And again, you can hold the relevant people, regardless of position or title. Everyone should be held accountable for their behaviour.
Yeah.
And if people stick together to do this, it will work. But as I said, certainly just now, we find that there are many police. Not only that, you speak about soldiers and ex-veterans. There's many people disgusted in the forces with what's going on just now. And I think it's just because of the way that things are going. And he says, John mentioned at the start of the programme, this is nothing new. It's been happening for centuries. But because of the control within the world just now and the fact that people are dumbed down, they don't know what's going on. And yet more and more people are starting to learn and they're becoming disgusted, but there are options there.
Yeah, I mean, history repeats itself. I mean, this isn't anything new, John. I mean, as John Hamer will fully be aware of, there's the thing, you know, going back 50, 60 years ago, it's called Operation Mockingbird. And it's an initiative designed by the CIA to condition people. Same as people go down the technical thing of calling gaslighting. But basically, you're using the mainstream media to condition the people. And this, I think the people are slowly starting to wake up, you know. Any of the people that, you know, I know a lot of people, whether they agree with it or not, you know, with vaccines concerned, oh, don't really want to have it, but I'm going to have it because I want to go abroad. You know, if you're one of those people and then all of a sudden someone's pulling the rug out from under you, you're going to feel, you know, aggrieved that, you know, I didn't really want to have that actually. But now all of a sudden I can't go abroad, or that's what we're being told, you can't go abroad, or this, you know, £5,000 that you could be fined £5,000. You know, that isn't the law, and you well know that, John. I mean, you know, this is another falsehood that we're being led down the garden path with, isn't it?
The longer this goes on, the longer it's not dealt with, it becomes part of the norm, and it will continue. You're speaking about the restrictions are being eased just now, which is very nice of the politicians. It says the sun's coming out just now, so the peasants are allowed out in the fresh air for a couple of months. He said, but it won't be that long before it changes, and it will be hot with another strain, and everyone will be locked inside again. So you maybe get 3 or 4 months, and that'll be the end of it.
Well, yeah, then it start the next flu season, I bet.
Yes. Yeah. To continue what they're doing just now, if it just continued and there was no reprieve, there'd be more people moaning about it. However, he said because the politicians are not stupid, if they allow the peasants out for a couple of months for some fresh air, they can then lock them up in a couple of months.
Yeah.
If you want to, people have to understand there are things in processes now. He said that we can actually deal with this. He says it literally boils down to the behaviour of the so-called 1% of the establishment and the way that the people are suffering. If the people are suffering harm, loss and injury, you have a right to protect yourselves. Now, we're not speaking about anything ground changing. This is literally, you use the principles laid down under common law, your inherent rights to protect yourself, stand together, and I says you have a system, a structure in place. You're not actually doing anything, you just stand alone and say, well, if you wish to behave the way you do, continue to do so, but we're not using your system.
Yeah. It's that saying nothing changes if nothing changes.
Yeah.
I'll tell you when things won't change, John. When things definitely won't change. If everyone sits there and does nothing, definitely things won't change. You know, if people want a bit of help predicting the future, I'll give you a couple of examples of things that are happening behind the scenes that the public probably aren't aware of. The government recently put out to tender a contract for the advertising campaign for COVID for the next 2 years. Yeah, 2 years. You know, gives you a little insight into their thought process. Yeah, so people are now bidding for that advertising contract, which is about £2 million or something at the moment. The second one that may help you give you some insights into where the government's train of thought is that they're also putting up for tender contracts for companies to supply laptops for children to use at home next winter. Just to give you a couple of little examples of what's going on behind the scenes. This isn't stopping people, you know, every flu season. This effectively, you're going to be like a seaside business. This way I look at it. It's like almost a seasonal campaign of what happens between summer and winter, you know. So from October to April, you know, we were able to predict that to the days and to the week. You know, your flu seasons, you're going to be banged up again, you know, for want of a better phrase. And then you'll be fighting for your rights to see how long you're allowed out in the summer. And if people don't stand up to this, then nothing is going to change. You know, this is going to continue. People need to get up, get off their asses, excuse my language, and do something about this. Because unless you do, this repetitive cycle is going to keep coming back and keep coming back. And your children deserve better, because
Absolutely.
our children deserve the right to grow up with the same freedoms and rights that we all were allowed to grow up with, you know, and without fear of oppression and living in an oppressive society. And that's where we currently are. Anyone that wants to see where these people want to go with this, you only need to look at China. It's really their sort of model, if you like, for what Klaus Schwab is doing. And you know how religions are treated over there. If you look at how the Uyghur Muslims treated, you know, they're setting out to recondition you because you don't think, you know, how they want you to think. How old people are treated in China. The same thing's going to happen with pensions. People in China get to 65 years old, and then you've basically outlived your usefulness. You're no longer profitable. You know, you're no good on the production line anymore for the 1%. And therefore your role then is to look after your children's children, so your children can go to work and work their bones, you know, work their fingers to the bone until they are only good for looking after the next generation. If that's the life that you all want for yourselves, and more importantly for your children, then carry on doing nothing, because that's what you're going to get. And you know, you reap what you sow. And you know, unless people need to stand up and you know, and be counted. And I applaud, you know, Delores, John Smith, John Heyman, all these people are trying to make a difference, you know, in terms of get up and do something, you know, because at the moment we're wrapped up in this world of legalized criminality, that these people, they don't want things to work. They want things to descend into chaos and to, you know, businesses to fail, because that suits their bigger agenda. You know, it's Delores, you know, where do you see this going in terms of, by the way, for this summer being let out? And to say being let out, is it crazy? It is like being in prison, isn't it? You know, it's like I'm
So
due
I think
up
the
for
thing
parole.
is, what I'm doing in Project Accountability is that we need to fight back against individuals, right? So we pay our money and taxes to fund them to take away our inalienable rights and not give us access to justice, and that the education system is not providing high quality education. The healthcare system is prescribing things and enforcing and coercing people that are not good for their health. The media is not reporting the truth, and the politicians are, you know, enforcing lockdown, causing huge harm and coercing people to say you can only engage in society and travel if you take an mRNA injection that causes huge harm and death, right? So I guess what we need to do, even though it's very uncomfortable, and a lot of the people who are still wearing the masks in their core know that what is going on is wrong, but they are actually intrinsically have such a sense of what is really going wrong, they may not feel they have the wherewithal to address it. And so what is incumbent on us who have been awake for a long time is to build the wonderful world of the future and then to transition and communicate to them by them asking questions, you know, in a gentle way, to not have this chaos and confusion and fear and uncertainty, but actually say to them, there was an issue with health, but we actually have prevention and treatment. Reduce the fear. You don't need these untested injections causing harm. We have a new system of justice and a new system of banking and media and people who will be elected to swear an oath almost all the time that they will work in the interest of ordinary people, so that we can actually transition. It may take 10 years, but we can actually transition, you know, in 1 or 2 years. And the unit that I worked in, there is, where societies collapse over centuries, there is a field of study of how to ease the transition, whether it's an economic collapse or a war or an environmental or weather collapse. It is not that difficult to transition people from, we'll say there was famine in Korea in the 70s, and 20 years later, it was one of the most successful economies, right? So that if you can actually get, and I would say in the world, probably 50%, like I was in a park, you know, within a very short distance from my home today, nobody was wearing masks, right? And I've never worn a mask. So really, it's already the globalists, this was their last play. If you look and have read, you know, decades ago, Agenda 21 for the 21st century, for the next 80 years, what is happening now was supposed to be really happening in 10 or 20 years time, and they've lost control. So what we need to do is not just repair it for now, we need to fundamentally educate people that this is a systematic undermining of the fabric of society, free speech, you know, access to travel, enabling. But just I'll be quick, is to say that we are already building the new world. There are so many millions of people that are aware in education, health, in the law, like John Smith and people here, that we already have the structures to rebuild a society. And the very simple thing people need to do is to not make themselves unwell. I would not recommend the mRNA injection, and to engage in their communities, get access to seeds and food, move their finances into a non-globalist, non-IMF, non-EU based thing where they can take your money over 24 hours over the weekend. You know, transition to protect yourself. Don't be afraid. Re-engage with your society, and then come join
I think people are waking up a bit, Delores. I mean, what I found is really groundbreaking on the 20th of March in London was the dynamic that I've never seen before. You had people from, you know, I've seen lots of big protests in front of many of them. The dynamic that you had is young and old, men and women from all ages, from all politics, from all religion or colour or creed, coming together as one. And I don't think I've ever seen that dynamic in that prevalence before in any big protest, with all of those people coming together. Because to me, the playing field has changed. You know, for so long now, people have bought into perhaps one of the biggest lies about left and right. You know, this is the divide and conquer. You know, and for too long now, it's all left wing, right wing. And listen, you know, politics, they put this down as on a line. You know, as if politics, left wing and right wing is a straight line. If that straight line was a piece of string, if that straight line was a piece of string, Delores, and you pick up both ends of that piece of string, they meet in the middle.
In the 80s, right, where actually I grew up in this huge extended community in rural Ireland and in Tipperary, where actually everybody looked after us. You know, the neighbors, I used to come home from school and give flowers to the neighbors. They would come out and say hello to us. And that we as a community, the farmers, helped each other. And you know, if there was an occasion, a wedding or a funeral, the whole community engaged, not just for the weeks of the funeral, but also afterwards to look after each other. So I think the human spirit resonates on freedom, truth, hope, justice, and love. And that really what's happening is an awakening of the kindness and human spirit. And I have great hope. And I'll let the other two Johns now come in, but I have great hope that
many of these things, it's like going back to the war spirit and things.
Excuse me, Justin, is there a reason? Hello, Justin.
Sorry, Harry, mate.
You've got Del in the waiting room, but you've not
Is
brought him
Delroy
in.
there? Can Delroy come in and join
Yeah,
in?
bring,
with
yeah,
us?
bring him in, Justin. Yeah, bring him
And
in.
Yeah,
maybe
please-
the two
please do.
Johns might.
No,
want to-
Justin. Tap your screen like Delores was telling you,
Okay.
and slide your screen left and right, and you'll see a thing that says participants.
Ah,
There you go. We'll train you up. Don't you worry.
just
Now,
in case anyone hadn't
that's-
worked it out.
and then you'll be able to see where there's Del in the waiting room, and you can let him in and approve
Okay.
him.
Yeah, if how do I get that in?
Go to the waiting room in the participants and bring him in.
Okay. Well, how am I doing that?
Just click on participants. Tap the screen or slide it left and right, and you'll see it.
Blind and ship with technology. Excuse my language.
Don't worry, we'll train you. Don't you worry.
I can't see participants.
If you slide the screen left or right with your finger,
Yeah.
and then you should
Oh,
eventually
good.
see participants.
Whatever. I can see myself in Delores. I don't know. For some reason, it just doesn't do it with me. I don't know.
No, just keep sliding the screen, and you'll see it.
What, sideways?
Yeah, sideways. Yeah. Well, that's turned your camera off, so you found that button.
And maybe if any of the Johns want to have a
Yeah.
have their-
Yeah, both
So,
Johns,
if you can
both
try
of
and
the-
pick Delroy in.
both of the Johns can give it a go if they want. They can bring him in.
Okay, shall I go?
Yeah, go for it. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to say when we were talking.
No,
about,
sorry, what I meant was both of your. I meant both of your co-hosts on here. You can bring Del in if you want.
Oh, okay. So just click on the admit button. Is that
Yeah,
right?
just click on the admit button. Yeah,
Okay.
that's the one that Justin can't find.
You finished now, Jace?
There you go.
Thank you.
I'll leave you alone now, Justin.
Apologies for that short interlude. But yeah, if we can bring in John Hamer in terms of what we were saying here, where you basically got the the meeting of people from all walks of life, left, right, every colour, every creed, every age, male, female, coming together as one. And it's the first time I've seen this, and I think to me that's quite groundbreaking. The turnout for that event and the very diverse group of people that was there. So and long may it continue. Really, it's almost like one race, the human race, and for too long now people are divided. That suits the powers as long as you divide. I think what happened with Brexit probably accelerated things, in terms of what Delores was talking about earlier, because all of a sudden, when people vote for themselves, so this thing about having proportional representation for once, irrespective of whether you wanted to vote in or out, it's neither here nor there, but the proportional representation to the 1%, that scares the life out of them. The very thought that people could, vote for themselves or speak for themselves sort of thing, and them not being in control of it. And I think that accelerated their plan that we're now living under now, in terms of Klaus Schwab Great Reset, because I think they thought, hang on a minute, we need to act here because otherwise the people are going to take back control. How do you see that, John Hamer?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you're totally right when you say that politics, left and right, is just another divide and conquer mechanism. Everything, race, gender, politics, the whole spectrum of society is built on this divide and conquer strategy. Because let's face it, I mean, there are nearly 8 billion of us and only a few thousand of them. It's the way by which they control us, and it works, and it's successful, so they continue doing it over and over and over again. And that's why you get these organizations like Black Lives Matter, which really push the race agenda, the LBGT.
Soros backed. We saw that with what was going on in Bristol on the Sunday, once again, with the mainstream media's portrayal of things. I find it kind of ironic, but they were exposed where people were exposing the 2 police vehicles having the same number plate, and that one of the police vehicles, the MOT, had run out in January, as if, clearly it was staged and contrived. I think over the course of that weekend, the mainstream media were exposed more than has happened in the last 18 months, I think, for the man on the street, to actually sit there and go, do you know what? These people have been banging on about mainstream media bias, and we're being lied to. They could see it with their own eyes that weekend. And hopefully, those people having seen that with their own eyes will now stand up with the rest of us, stand as one and fight back. Make a stand for your children, by the way, for your children, for future generations, for the human race to come together and go, we're not going to take this anymore. John Smith, you know, what your feelings of that? Was this the same in the process in Scotland? Do you get that feeling that people from all walks of life and across the divides are coming together?
Yeah, it's something we've been dealing with for a few years, and we're looking at the people we speak to. I think when you look at the past history, and obviously the so-called 1% of the establishment, they are literally a few numbers. And if you look at the people here, this is with the authority that they have when they stand together and combine. The state have tried for not only decades, but centuries to try and obviously cause problems and separate everyone. And that's down to things like your wars and basically anything, race, religion, colour, creed, it doesn't matter. What we've done is with the common law court just now, although we're using the terminology common law court, it's applicable to everyone. This is if you view the point, this is we're here as living men and women, and we stand together as living men and women. This is now the term common law court can also be substituted with the term natural law, universal law, the creator's law, or even God's law, or law of the land. The terms and conditions that we use and we stand by are cause no harm, loss, and injury, and ensure you're honourable in your contractual dealings. This applies to everything we mentioned before. All the various types of laws, it's all applicable to living men and women, and it removes you from the friction that's being created and the problems created by the statutory system and the corporations. You stand together as living men and women. And as soon as people learn to understand that, and that we do stand together here against an establishment, it's just things will change for the better. I think they are learning, and they're starting to increase now. I think the latest number just now is we do a sort of weekly check just now. I think if I recall now, I think we're up to 182 countries now. People are using the system that we've set up throughout the world. So we're not far from basically having all the countries signed up to what we're doing. And it shows that the people worldwide are sick to the back teeth with what's going on, the corruption and the harm, loss and injury they're suffering. And they're prepared to stand with like-minded people, living men and women all over the world. So I think we're heading in the right direction just now, but if it continues, we'll be okay.
Everyone should get behind common law, irrespective. You know, it doesn't touch on boundaries. We're not talking about what country you're in, your colour, your creed, you know, your politic. This is just common law. This is about people's rights, you know, and standing up for their rights. And everyone should get behind this, because what John Smith's doing, by the way, you know, is quite groundbreaking, and there's a lot of stuff going on in the background that is coming to fruition now. There's a lot of hard work on him.
Sorry for jumping in. I just like to point out, as has been mentioned a few times, what John Smith's doing. John Smith's not doing anything. It's the common law court. Yeah. This is cannot exist without the people. The common law court is the people, and it doesn't matter where you are in the world, race, religion, colour, creed, it doesn't matter. It's about living men and women standing together. We're here and we've provided a lawful remedy for the people to use. If the people choose to use it and stand together, that is the way that you'll overcome adversity. It says so we can do it, and it's just a matter. Without the people standing together, there is no common law court. It says it's the fact that the people are choosing to use this to provide themselves a lawful remedy to protect themselves. The more people that do it, the easier this is to set up and run the system, which is working just now, and more people are doing it. We've just provided the mechanism for doing that, but it's the court itself is the people. Okay.
I'm looking forward, John, for our viewers at home. We're coming up to do a documentary, and John's going to show us, you know, common law in practice. So I'm looking forward to coming up to Scotland to see you. Hopefully, it won't be snowing in the next week or two, John. Yeah, but I'm looking forward to crossing the border for a change. You still with us, Delores? Is Delroy with us now?
Yeah, I'm still with you. I've just been patient. Sorry, Justin. I'm just waiting. Sorry.
Delroy, how you doing, mate? Sorry about the earlier problems getting you on. I should introduce Delroy. Delroy, sorry, got a program on Tuesday evenings on Wake Up UK. He's a fellow presenter. We thought we'd like to bring him in. I think Delroy's in Leeds tonight. Am I right in thinking that?
Yeah, that's correct, Justin. That's right.
How's things up that end of the country?
It's beautiful at the moment. We've had
across the UK.
Yeah, it's beautiful at the moment. We're having really. I've been doing some sun gazing. It's beautiful weather at the moment. We've been fortunate. We're having a nice last couple of days. Has been really beautiful weather. We're very lucky. I don't know how long it's going to last for because they'll start doing the normal nonsense with the chemtrail. But at the minute, we're having beautiful weather and long may it continue.
There was a protest up in Bradford on Saturday. I know
That's correct.
Friends. Did you attend that?
No, I didn't. Obviously because it's that protest was it was a bit more controversial, should I say? But I knew people that was there, but I chose not to go.
Yeah,
because...
I haven't had too much feedback. I don't know how well it was attended. You know, it's Bradford up in Yorkshire last Saturday. I'm led to believe it was a little bit more tumultuous, shall we say? Than,
yes,
Antifa
based. I'll agree with you on that.
So was it?
There's some Antifa there. Yes.
Was it hijacked then?
Yeah, to some degree it was. Yeah. That's what I was told as well. Not complete, but to some degree it was. Yes, and there were being quite confrontation with the some of them, not all of them, Justin, but some of them being quite confrontational with the police, which is what. In an ideal situation, I don't know, because you're in the middle of asking something, and I do want to get to Delores at some point because I want to speak to her. But I'll say this. I'm not the biggest fan of the police, but the way they were speaking to the police at times, particularly with the thing about the last Saturday's issue when everybody was down in London is the fact that people weren't getting arrested. Everybody, like you said, I agree with you. Lots of people came together from all different backgrounds all over the country, right, for the one common goal of upholding their rights. I agree with you completely. And no matter where people come from, they all came together based on that. They weren't there to antagonize the police. They weren't there to wind up the police. They were there just to have their rights upheld and let people know, and let the government know, you know, we're not standing this for no more. That's the difference between that protest was brilliant. My couple of friends went there, whereas this protest, the one in Bradford, was a little bit different because of the fact that it was they were having to go to the police, and I think it was John Hamer or John Smith. They were saying that they want to get the police on side. The worst way that I can see this going is if and I'm not a big fan of police, is if people are screaming and shouting at the police. That's exactly the wrong way to go about things because you're not going to get the police on your side by doing that.
My take on definitely what happened in Bristol and of what's happening with Antifa and so forth. If you think about this logically, and I do think people are starting to catch on with this now. As of the 20th of March, there were people from walks of life who were going, all against Antifa, because what they can see is they're starting to see what's happening. If you take it that the police are sort of at the behest of the government's paymasters, and so are Antifa, so they're more or less sister groups in some ways.
Exactly. One's funded by George Soros, and the other one's funded by the state.
The same paymaster.
Yeah, one's funded by George Soros, one's funded by the state. That's the only difference. One's funded by a globalist, George Soros, and the other's funded by the state.
Sorry, mate.
One's funded by George Soros and the other one's funded by the government, the state. That's the difference.
There's an argument that the government are being funded by some of these people as well, I mean, what we were talking about earlier, the government can't afford to pay out this money, like they do in furlough and things like that, because they've got more money going out than they've got coming in. So that begs the question, well, who's the paymaster for the government? I mean, I was on this for November 2019. If people remember, there was a vote in Parliament in London for the MPs voting for a second referendum. Yeah, and what actually happened was over 400 MPs voted against their own electorate, and that's cross-party. We're not coming from anywhere left, right, all that crap. Cross-party, over 400 MPs voted against their own electorate. And then you have to ask the question, well, why are they doing that? So they voted with their paymasters against their electorate. Yeah. And if you think of that terms going forwards now, who are their puppets and they're dancing for a paymaster. John was saying earlier, this goes back for years of people being selected, as John Hamer was saying, politicians and presidents and so forth. But if you look at that now, they're and if you're looking at Antifa, for example, being funded by Soros, well, what else is Soros funding? What else is Schwab and Bill Gates and that funding? Bill Gates, for example, gives £80 million a year to the BBC. The EU were giving money to the BBC and so forth. So a lot of these things going on behind the scenes. There's an argument that they're sister groups really, because they're both probably being paid. And a lot of Antifa, ladies and gentlemen, these people get paid. I've seen this time and time again when, you know, when you're seeing these crisis actors and things like these people are paid to come along and do things. Even when they were doing, Soros was paying for people to do Remain things and so forth. They were actually, they were going to extras companies like for actors and paying £80 a day to pick people up in a coach and you get a packed lunch with it. So this is you know, this is real. This is what happens in the background. But you know, what's your take, Delores, on how, putting that to one side, you know, how you see different divides coming together as one now? Is that sort of apparent in Yorkshire, or is it something different that hasn't come across yet? Or
in general, a lot of people are questioning what's going on. You're seeing it all the time. I think there is a big issue of awareness of consciousness that's coming, and they knew this was coming. I did some cosmological stuff on this, so this was years ago. This is the age of revealing revelation, and the so-called government of the cabal cult, I refer to them as the Menace Hair cult. They're playing out a script, and Trump was a part of that script. He's done some of his bits and pieces, and so you're seeing this battle that's taking place. And this society, I refer to it as a societal reset they're trying to set, and this could go it could go either way. And I'm seeing both sides of that at the moment. We're in this middle part where you're seeing the wheat being separated from the chaff, so to speak, and you're seeing that there's a swell of people realizing what's going on and they're going one way, and then you've got other people being pushed the other way, which is done by obviously the government in terms of the institutes like obviously Tavistock, places like that. They're doing that NK ultrastar mind control programming. So you're seeing there's an attack, and I think you mentioned it earlier, Justin. There's a definite attack on humanity across the board, and most
human
people
race
are coming
to stick together, Delores, because you know, the left, the 1%, call them what you like, you know, it's in their interest to divide and conquer, and they've been doing it for years. And it's like people falling for the 3-card trick, you know. It's people are hopefully, I think people are starting to wake up. How's this viewed in Ireland, Delores? Is this crossing political divides and things like that in Ireland, where people are starting to see through this and come together?
Well, I think it's like, you know, when we met up in Trafalgar Square, we had people from every corner of the British Isles, right? It was beautiful. And it's amazing that the veterans came to just defend, you know, all of us, from whether there were people from Sweden and Copenhagen and Ireland as well, which was beautiful. And of course, what also is amazing is across all traditions in Ireland, we are getting to know each other and support each other, both, you know, from every aspect of Ireland as well. So I think I really think the British Isles in the world is the center of this enlightenment or renaissance or reawakening. And that when you come together, whatever your religion or traditions or whatever, rural from cities, whatever, Catholic, Protestant, no religion, that then you can really look back and see how the media and Soros and the EU and the politicians play the whole Brexit narrative, the black versus white narrative, and the financial crisis, you know, gender, the 72 genders or whatever, you know what I mean? That actually, for those of us who are awake and have been awake for a long time, we will never go back to sleep. And they can lie all they want about effective things or that you can't travel. But for those of us who haven't worn a mask, really, we are, you know, the warriors. We're just going, no, we, for whatever reason, whether it's our grandparents, whether we grew up in rural communities or we were just born this way, we're not going to take the lies, right? And they're not going to coerce us. And what we're trying to do is to dedicate our lives to protect people who might be kinder spirits, that they believe that if you're in a white coat or you're a doctor or you're, you know, the government or the police, that they have your best interests in heart. So I think I would say probably 60% in Ireland know what's going on. And
those numbers are only going to grow, Delores. There's only one way this is going to go. That it's, you know, the people waking up. More and more people are going to wake up. It's not going to be less and less.
But what I want to do, Justin, is just to say is that the more we can make principals, right? If principals and teachers are saying to children, you have to wear a mask, right? Which is entirely unnecessary, right? Or if
cruelty, I'd call it.
You know, if in the care homes or nurses are sadly injecting people and they go back to that nursing home a month later and half the people are dead, right? That in a way we are not going to, that those of us that are aware of the lies, we're not going anywhere. And we have to say, if you make your living as a policeman doing criminal and unlawful behavior, or you're getting paid as a judge or a nurse or a principal, and you are causing huge harm to the elderly, to society, the business owners, children, that in a way, in the Nuremberg, right, just because
Yep.
there's a regulation or whatever, you have a duty to not cause harm, and we are not going anywhere. So in a way, I would say to them, in a way, be afraid, be very afraid, right? Because they have been engaged and earning money on doing things that are causing harm, are essentially unlawful and criminal. And no matter, we are dedicating years of our lives to ensure that not only in 2020, 21 will it be stopped, but we need a whole education program around propaganda, lies, unlawful behavior, and how to hold people to account. It needs to be a subject in society and on curriculum. And in what we need is professional codes of conduct that are meaningful, lawful, require integrity, and do not, if they see unlawful and criminal and unjust behavior, they need to call it out to get their next month's salary. So I have great hope, right? I would say in Ireland, 60% of people are aware.
I think I think as things progress, I think there's more and more you'll end up with this sense of, like, every good story, every good film, I said that sense of triumph over adversity will start to come into things. You know, it's almost that you've gone through something and come out the other side, or hopefully you're starting to see the light and some of the tools coming out the other side.
And you know what I'm saying, Justin, is you just need one nurse, one doctor, one policeman, one politician, one more or less in the world, in the common law countries, to actually personally be responsible for the harm, for the death, you know, the nurses, because if they went back to a care home and 26 people were dead, they have a duty to report that to the police and to the regulator. And if they don't, they can be held to account because it's a clinical trial. So I know there was arrests in Brazil because of false clinical trials, right? So we just need in the world to have one teacher, one doctor, and all of the rest of them are personally liable similarly.
Yeah, I've noticed, we're going to have to wrap up soon, but I've noticed recently that a lot of these professionals and people in power are looking to shift blame now. And it's quite noticeable now, you know, even from the criminal complaints that were put in where the police are trying to shift it onto the MPs are trying to shift it on police.
No.
The same's happening with the nurses and the police and politicians. You know, a lot of these things, even where the vaccine's concerned, for example, you get the doctors calling you up and saying, oh, you haven't had your vaccine, you're going to have a vaccine. And I'm okay. And if you ask them questions, say, oh, you know, what's in it? You know, have you read my medical file? Is it okay for me to take it with the existing medical complaints I have, you know? And one, they don't seem to know that because they haven't done their homework. But two, this is the answer we've been getting from people. Oh, ask the person administering the vaccine. Now, the person administering the vaccine, as you well know, Delores, is not an eminent professional. Could be somebody that half the time doesn't even have medical training.
And I think
the doctors are looking to shift blame with that, I think, a lot of the time.
If you take a good hard look at the indemnity insurance industry, right, around the police, around the governments, the politicians, the state, the doctors, the regulators, the hospitals, right, that really there are huge claims coming down the tracks. And if the current court system is not going to prosecute criminal behavior, then I would be very interested in setting up, you know, an autopsy service, a insurance service for people who are not injected, and a complaints and claimants on professional private indemnity insurance. And if the police don't have it, then in their private and personal capacity, because I asked them, do they have a house or do they have a pension?
Individual culpability, yeah.
Yeah, but if, you know, I actually say to the police, do you have a house or do you have a pension? Because you are engaging in criminal behavior and I will sue you personally in your private capacity.
Yeah, this is one of the things that John Smith will refresh your memory that, you know, when the police are stopping you, if you know, as John Smith was saying earlier and last week, you know, can I see a warrant card? Can you give me some identity? Because they don't want to do that. They don't want to identify themselves. That's why and most of the police officers now don't have their numbers on their epaulets, which they used to have, because they don't want to be identified. And that's probably part and parcel of that as well now, that they don't
They
want
have
be
to have their
identified as an
warrant
individual.
oath cards as well. And, you know, they can be privately insured for their own liability for, and of course, what we need is just some, you know, individual cases, and then the
Yeah.
whole house of
And
cards.
I think
literally
that's
will
what's
fall.
going on behind the scenes now, Delores, that people are looking at taking these, you know, we're not going to go into too much because some of the things are, you know, protecting people and data and different things that are going on and cases of judicacy and that. But behind the scenes, there's quite a lot of cases I'm aware of people that are now trying to take these things and long may that continue, I think, you know. Listen, guys, I'm just going to finish up. John Smith, have you got any thoughts on that, you know, before we go? You know, where the police are going, holding them accountable as individuals, as well as, I think it's the future.
Yeah, it's pretty much what we've actually been working on for the last 4 years, well, 3.5, 4 years. The Common Law Court exists to do that very thing, hold everyone accountable for their behaviour. If you're living in a system when people can commit harm, loss or injury or cause harm, loss or injury, he says, and not be held accountable, it's not something that anyone, any rationally minded individual would want. He says, if someone causes harm, loss or injury, regardless of who they are, they should be held accountable. Now, the existing system's failing, so which is why we've set up what we're doing just now. And anything that helps progress this will help in the long run. Yeah.
John Hamer, any last thoughts on where we are today and how you see things going?
Yeah, I mean, I'm with Delores on this actually. You know, she painted a very, very, very positive picture of the future, and I really do subscribe to that. Absolutely, I think it's definitely in our hands. You know, I think we're with a concerted effort and getting more and more people inside, which is actually happening. You know, more and more people are waking up. You know, I really believe that there is a positive future ahead. I mean, and one thing I don't want to emphasize is that I don't want to go back to the old normal. We need to restructure society in the model that John talked about very extensively.
Yeah,
and
it's almost looking at it like an opportunity, John, isn't it?
It is, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, they think it's their opportunity, but actually it's ours, not theirs. Yeah.
Delores, I'll just leave you with the last day tonight. I'd like to thank all of the my guests for tonight. As usual, we're blessed every week with the amount of people that join us, eminent people from all walks of life, from John Swift of Common Law Courts, John Hamer, historian and author, Professor Delores Cahill, my friend Delores that's joined us from Wake Up UK. I'd like to thank all of you for taking part this week. I hope to see you all next week. And I'm going to leave Professor Delores Cahill with one last bit of positivity for us to go out on tonight, yeah? To give everyone a little smile on their face as we go forwards and be positive. Delores?
Unfortunately, I think she's actually left.
Oh no, I wanted to message. I wanted to speak as well.
Shows you it's real. Shows you it's live. Listen, everyone, I hope you enjoyed tonight's program. I'd like to thank everyone for coming, and I'd like to once again say we'll be with you next Wednesday, 7 o'clock. I'd like to thank guys at Wake Up UK facilitating what we do every week, and I'd like to thank you most of all for joining us. Give us your input. Sorry, I've had a real problem this week because I can't see my screen, as we were saying earlier. Send your questions in to Wake Up UK. Send them into the UK Freedom Alliance. We've got plans that we're doing with the UK Freedom Alliance. Come on the websites, come on the page, get involved in what we're doing with legal and medical help and publicising things going forwards. Listen, have a great week. Everyone stay safe and well, and I'll see you next Wednesday night. Thank you all. Good night.
Thanks, Justin.
Good night.